Good morning. So I want to dip my ignorant mind into the Israeli and Palestinian thing, and not to explore it in any deep context or whatever, because I'm ignorant of it, right? You hear bits, but I've never been there. I'm not immersed in the history or the cultures of either of these peoples, right? But the reason I want to talk about it is because it's making the headlines now, because the Israeli embassy has decided to leave Ireland, right? And they've done so citing a growing level or growing rate of anti-Semitism, right? Or a climate that does not cater to Jewish people in Ireland. It doesn't allow for Jewish people to feel free and safe in Ireland, right? However true that may be, that's their position, right? And Simon Harris has come out spoken of the level of atrocities on both sides and the freedom of action or freedom of choice of the Israelis to withdraw from Ireland, right? Micheál Martin has also pushed for a two-state solution and has recently backed a motion, backed the potential for claims of genocide from the Israelis to the Palestinians, right? An act of genocide that the Israelis, according to him, are currently engaged in with the Palestinians. That all may be true. I don't know, right? I don't know. And before people say, well, haven't you seen the videos? Videos are just videos, right? To a large degree, they could be from anywhere. And we've seen this over the years, right? With the Syrian Assad gassing his own people. We've seen videos of that. We have learned subsequently that those videos were staged, right? And they weren't actually showing what they said, what they were said to have been showing, right? So take all videos with a pinch of salt. Do I believe people are being destroyed and killed over there? Absolutely, of course, right? That's nearly par for the course with that area, right? Is there philosophical, theological, and moral complications involved in that area that go way beyond and above what I can take in and what most people can take in, being thousands of miles away from it? Absolutely. Are we at the mercy of a biased media? Of course, right? So what we're being fed is not necessarily pure, right? It doesn't mean you fall on either side of it. It just is a recognition that we cannot have full information. Is there military intelligence complications and nuances involved in that region? Absolutely. For instance, like Hamas being kind of allowed to flourish, if not indirectly or directly being funded by Israel, right? Is that an issue? Yes, right? But be that as it may, the principle involved of what Micheál Martin and Simon Harris have been kind of dancing around, if not being a little bit more strong in their pushing for, and also couple that with the policies that both of these people have allowed in Ireland, right? And you're in a seriously weird situation here, right? And I think these two fellas are revealing themselves. Micheál Martin more so, right? Because you take statements that he's after making over the years, and then you run a string through the beads, right? And you go, okay, well, I can see what you are. So the idea of speaking in the context of the EU, that Micheál Martin wants nothing to do with that backward-looking idea of sovereignty, right? Meaning he prefers EU law to supersede national law. So he's not in the position, he's not in the mindset, he doesn't fall into the camp of viewing Ireland as an individual nation state. He views it as part of the EU, right? So he doesn't differentiate between EU and Ireland. Or he at least supports, if not both, he at least supports the idea of the EU laws superseding Irish laws, right? So they have the veto. No, you're not allowed to have a veto, right? But the EU do. The EU have a veto over any law that's made in Ireland that would be contrary to what the EU would want, right? The EU can veto that. That's never spoken about, is it? But that's a given, that's a fact, right? And Micheál Martin supports that, as does Simon Harris, as does the rest of the cabal, the regime, right? Micheál Martin, don't call it a regime. Why not, Micheál? Because it is a regime, right? It has an intention, it has an intent, it has a goal, and it will just steamroll and run over people to get to that goal. That's a regime, right? You can't change it. Votes, whenever they're allowed, are questionable at best, right? But back to the Israel thing and the principle involved in that. Take the names of the countries out of it, right? Israel, Palestine, or take the names of the peoples out of it for a second. And you find that what the two lads, Micheál Martin and Simon Harris, are supporting, given their policies as well, right? Because you have to plug that into the context. You can look at it in both ways, and this is where people may disagree with one another, right? Because you can take either side of this conflict, the nation state of Israel, whatever you want to call Palestine, if you want to call it a country or an encampment or whatever you want to call it, right? Call them a people, right? So you have this skirmish between them, whatever the reasons for it, right? Whatever the reasons, both feel they're justified, right? So both peoples think that they're right, maybe, right? So you have the siding or the spoken alliance or sympathy between Irish people and the Palestinians. And I read a comment there this morning, and it was saying that any Irish man who knows his history would be for the Palestinians and against the Israelis. I understand that a little bit. People rarely unpack it, but I understand it a little bit. So the way they tend to be looking at it is, you have a superpower, Israel, right? A very modern, militarily supported and funded and backed nation state, nuclear weapons, big influence worldwide in terms of lobbyists, in terms of business, in terms of media, in terms of dual citizenship, right? So you have Jewish people, Israeli people who have an Israeli passport and a US passport, and they are in the halls of power and the corridors of power in America, right? So they have big influence worldwide. Even in Ireland, to a degree, there's an influence of Jewish people in Ireland, right? And people will hook onto that and say, well, look, they're pulling the strings everywhere. But, right, you have this big nation state, Israel. And then you have the underdog, which it's painted as the underdog, right? This not modern, far from modern stretch of land with the Palestinians in it, who are governed by explicitly stated anti-Jewish people. Hamas would want to get rid of Jewish people, right? So their main aim is not necessarily, from what I can understand of it, the freedom of Palestinian people, because they're an Islamic people, right? They're an Islamic people. So their allegiance is to Allah before people. And this should be accepted and understood, right? In specific sects, Christian too, right? Christian too. Absolutely in Christianity. God is above your own people. God is above nations, right? And it's the same with Islam in some sects. So one of their goals is the eradication of Jewish people. And Irish people are sympathetic to that because they feel like it kind of equates with the English war with Ireland and the occupation of Ireland, right? So we're reading into this situation in the Middle East our own history. And we are colouring ourselves similar as the Palestinians are. And we are equating Israel with England. And as a result of that, you can understand why people will be sympathetic towards that cause, right? The Palestinian cause. But you can also understand that you might be a little bit overly involved or overly sentimental in what you're doing there, right? Because you can easily flip it around too. If you take Israel, look at what's around Israel. Israel is a small nation state, comparatively speaking, to the rest of the region, right? And surrounding Israel, you have a massive, massive contingent of people who follow a similar ideology. And you could say that Islam is a little bit more than a religion because it colors and influences every area of your life, right? Even in terms of law, right? And we kind of had a little bit of this in Ireland with the Catholic Church influencing policy. And even following the Civil War, some of the Irish politicians were willing to give the Vatican veto on policy for them to identify Ireland or identify the Free State as a free state, right, as a sovereign entity in and of itself, right? So we were nearly there, we were there, just not explicitly maybe, right? But in some of these Islamic countries, it's absolutely explicit, it is understood, it is in your face. We are abiding by Islamic law here, right? And Israel is surrounded by all of this, right? So Israel then, in comparison to, I don't know the numbers of how many people are in Israel or Jewish people. I listened to one guy speaking yesterday, an interview, and his father was involved in the creation of Hamas, right? So he's in and around that area. And he says there's probably 20 million Jews worldwide, I think, right? So they're a minority, a tiny minority, surrounded by people, at least in their own doctrines, their own religious doctrines, their own hadiths, the messages of and the example of their prophet, who is the perfected man, right, wanted to exterminate Jewish people. So you can easily plug Irish history into that as well and read the Irish people as Israel, right, as similar to Israel. A nation state surrounded by an empire, the British Empire, right, who loads it, who has hatred for it, who thinks nothing of destroying 2/3 of its population and displacing the other third, right? You can read us into that, right? Either side. So it's perfectly legitimate to see ourselves as Palestinians or to see ourselves as Israelis, because Irish people were a minority striving and battling to get itself up as a nation state and to remain that way, to not be engulfed by the surrounding empire, right? Similar to Israel, right? So whichever way you look at it, I think if you're making decisions based on that, based on the current situation, based on your understanding of Irish history and your emotional ties to Irish history, I'm not sure how clear you can be in coming up with a solution to that and coming up with your endorsement or your defense of one side or the other, right? Because there's a lot of things involved in that as well. So Ireland technically is a neutral country, which Micheál Martin has been absolutely desperate to get rid of over the last few years, right? Desperate to get rid of it. Doesn't believe in it, right? Doesn't want you neutral. Wants the potential for your children to be pulled into some EU or NATO war absolutely on the table. He wants that. Simon Harris is probably in agreement with him, right? But the policies that they have been implementing is to bring tens of thousands of Islamic people, flood Ireland with Islam. And Ireland then has been funded, backed, indoctrinated by these groups that push for a softening of Irish culture, a softening of Irish common sense and morality, to the point where it is more accepting of Islamic doctrine, right? Islamic doctrine then is to set up an international caliphate, right? And not a global caliphate, an Islamic caliphate, which is total domination of the world for Allah, right? In the name of Muhammad and in the name of Allah, right? And again, there's probably some sects that disagree with that, but fine. We understand what we're looking at in the world, right? And if you want to throw down one of these sects that aren't involved in that, off you go. Leave it down there and we can have a talk about that or whatever, right? But my main point is on the principle involved in this. And this is what I'm getting to. Simon Harris and Micheál Martin are setting up a situation of, if not explicit support for Palestine by trying to bring Israel through the courts, not a neutral thing really to do, right? Or by softly condoning the growth of Islam, which from an Israeli perspective, looking at Ireland with its increasing Islamic population, that would be a concern for Israeli people. That would be a concern for Jewish people, right? It's similar to Ireland looking at north of Ireland with a growing population of planters and English people and English armies coming in. Irish people would look at that and say, well, that's a big concern, right? And these lads are offering a two-state solution, which spits in the face of many Irish people and many historical Irish people. And the perspective that Irish people would have had and probably still have, the idea of a two-state solution. And these lads are endorsing that. Explicitly, they're endorsing that, right? And they're doing that pretending to speak for Irish people as if this is exactly what all Irish people want. It isn't, right? They can't speak like that. They can't speak like that because they don't represent all of Irish people, right? So the issue that Irish people will run into and are running into as a result of these shady characters is we also have a growing Islamic population in this country. We have a growing Islamic population in this country that wish to take control, the reins of control of this country. And they would see us as Western degenerates, right, who are not abiding by Sharia law or the laws according to Allah, right, the Islamic laws, the Islamic social norms and that. We are not abiding by them. So given the number growing and getting to a certain point, they will then obviously want to implement them laws here, right? So what happens then? Just say you get a good number of, or any number of Islamic people in areas of Ireland that are more heavily populated by Muslims, and they are elected officials and they wish to implement and change some of the laws in the area, hardline or softline, right? The idea of getting rid of dogs, certain kinds of dogs, and having them gone, that would go in line with Islamic doctrine, right? So if they get into an area, they have the ground support and they wish to start changing laws, maybe not like on paper legally, right, but culturally, just shifting the tone and the cultural setting of an area in Ireland. What happens to the Irish people there if they become a minority in that area and they're forced and compelled to abide by laws and common mores and an ethic that is not natural to them? Right? So people say, well, they can also leave. Why would they have to? Why should they? Because this is the problem. It's a dual application of logic, right? It's nonsense. So you'll have people that say, well, if the Irish people will become a minority in a certain area, they can also move. Grand. These same people would never apply that to Palestinians, right? Whilst they support the Palestine cause, right? It would never apply the same sort of reasoning. So this is an issue that Irish people are going to run into. Because if the current trajectory continues to grow, which is a reduction in Irish people in Ireland, tens of thousands of abortions, people leaving, fertility rate dropping, over time Irish population declines. At the same time, we're seeing a steady growth and increase of Muslims. The Islamic population is growing, right? Whether that is from people who come here, are born here into Islam, or whether that is some Irish people, for God knows why, wish to become Islamic themselves, become Muslims themselves, right? So you're going to see a conflict. And if Irish people have been so conditioned to view a minority of Muslims in the context of Israel and the Palestinians, comparatively speaking, the Palestinians to the Israelis would be a minority, right? But in the area, they're absolutely not a minority. They are the majority. They're a Muslim majority. And the Israelis are a minority, right? So it depends on what scope you're using, whether you're right up to it or whether you pull back a bit. It will colour your perspective on it, right? But if you have an antagonistic and a violent, if that tends to be the case, if that ends up being the case, that you have a growing minority, a substantial minority of Muslims in this country that become aggressive, more violent, more hostile to the systems of government that we have here by getting into places of power, right, and positions of power. By spending years and years and years backing the Palestinians' right to whatever, backing their cause based on the fact that they're a minority, based on the fact that they probably don't like Israel or nation states and much, right, and ignoring a massive parts of the context, then the Irish people are going to be hamstrung in terms of what they can do to a potential belligerent minority in this country, because you're going to have a significant percentage of people, whatever that number is, it's significant enough to cause massive noise in this country at the moment. So if Irish people decide, you know what, we want our land, we want it the way we want it to run based on the way we run as Irish people, and any of these hostile entities coming in here, we are absolutely getting rid of them. We are not accepting that anymore, right? This idea of implementing a theocracy on people and forcing massive numbers of people to abide by ideas that they've no interest in. And the Irish people decide, this loud crowd, you're gone. We're getting rid of you. You're going to have many Irish people who've been indoctrinated and conditioned into pro-Palestine, with no context ever given, right? They will turn on the Irish people that are deciding, we don't want that here. We're done with that. Get out. They will turn, right? And people might say, well, that doesn't really matter because look at the fools, the quality of people that seem to be endorsing the Palestinian stuff, right? The flag waving, because it's nearly all third level university college students who have no real world experience, soft minds, sponges, right? That have been just filled with dirty water and now they just spew it everywhere, right? They've no real understanding. They've no idea of the idea that what goes on over there is absolutely none of your business, right? Nor should it be. When you have similar acts that are happening in this country by disproportionately the very population of people, not directly Palestinian yet, but a growing population of people that follow the similar ideology, right? And Irish people are waving them in, bringing them in, housing them, feeding them, supporting them, and then horrible things are happening to Irish people here, right? And then these crowds of post-teenage angst students who feel like they want the cause, instead of backing their own people, they're looking at the desert thousands and thousands of miles away and finding a cause over there, and then trying to reroute that cause into the very fabric of Irish history when it has no business there. It has no business there, right? Because, as I said, you can read the situation in whatever way you want. Whether you want to side with a nation trying to retain its presence, or whether you want to side with the underdog and the oppressed, right? So it's just the Marxism idea again, right? The system of oppression and oppressed, right? And the Irish people, I wouldn't say most Irish people, I would just say the loudest of Irish people, who are the students who are backed by the media, backed by Middle Eastern money, all that sort of stuff. They make the racket that makes it sound like Irish people are pro-Palestinian and we're totally appalled by Israel and what it's doing, while ignoring what Simon Harris and Micheál Martin have allowed to happen in this country. It's a nonsense, right? And in the future, there is the potential for ethnic conflict, not just between new arrivals and Irish people, but between Irish people and Irish people. And it's not that long ago we had it the same, right? And that is absolutely a ghost that is being resuscitated at the moment, right? So my take on it is, I don't take sides. I'm not taking sides. Why would I take sides? Do I believe that people should be bombed into oblivion and children should be blown to pieces? No, I don't. Do I believe that Israel should be subjected to a trial of genocide based on their actions they're after taking? I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that. And if they are, if that is what they're doing, then off you go. But also, I do not support that if it means that what's going on in Ireland by this government gets to be ignored. Because it's the same outcome. It's children, what are they saying about Palestine? Agitation and an attempt to displace native peoples, i.e. Palestinians, off their land. Same thing happened in Ireland, right? You had villages whose population are after trebling, whatever way you want to pronounce it, over the last year, where the natives of that village, Irish people, have become a minority, right? That is ethnic displacement, demographic shifts and demographic displacement. You're seeing that in Ireland, right? Children being killed indiscriminately in Palestine, disgusting. Are you seeing that in Ireland? Yeah, disgusting, right? So you're seeing these politicians speak of Israel and Palestine the way they should be speaking about what's going on in Ireland, but they won't do that, because the reason why a similar thing is going on in Ireland, with children being killed, women being attacked, people being hurt, lives being lost, is because of the policies of these lads. And Simon Harris said it yesterday, that Israel are engaged in, they pulled the embassy as a distraction, right? That they're engaged in diplomatic distraction. He's doing the same thing. He wants to put, and this is why even making this video, my interest in Israel and Palestine is nearly zero, right? Nearly zero. It is only peaked because of the principles involved in it. And the fact that what country is going to accept most Palestinian refugees? Ireland, right? Do I want them coming over here? No. Do I hate them? No, I don't know them. But I understand that a lot of them follow the same doctrine that is rapidly growing in this country, and that is absolutely antagonistic and hostile in every single country that it grows in, right? And that's not an attack on any type of people. It's an attack on the worldview that they have, right? Some worldviews are just pathetic and they lead to terrible outcomes, and you should be free to call them out as such, right? It doesn't matter whether that's a Christian ethic or whether that's an Islamic ethic, right? The outcome of some of these things can lead to travesties. And that's not an honest conversation that's been happening. It's just, oh, well, look at them, and then they did this, and blah, blah, blah. Let's have a bigger conversation around that, right? Simon Harris and Micheál Martin, ye have absolutely no business in trying to rewrite Irish sentiment and Irish history by declaring that some other nation should impose or should allow for a two-state solution, right? That's spitting in the face of many, many Irish people that would have died for the contrary in this country. For a total nation state they wanted. And Micheál Martin just coming out saying, well, look, I don't believe in that anymore, so therefore neither do the Irish people, right? And instead of them using their platforms to come out and call for peace and negotiations and be like, oh, you know what, you come to Ireland and we'll have a conversation about it. Because there's a better way than this. And if the cause of it is that there's such an ideological divergence where one group wants to massacre another group, or both groups want to massacre each other, then what? Can we come about and change that? Right? Can we work around that and grow up a little bit and just shift that? Because that's an absolute nonsense that only leads to people suffering endlessly. The very thing we're complaining about, right? But we just continue complaining about it while ignoring the fact that the exact same thing is happening in this country, while they're in positions to control that. They're allowing that, right? So I suppose the main point of this, Simon Harris and Micheál Martin are absolutely responsible for the very things they're accusing Israel of doing. That's the distraction. We get you talking, get this fool in his car talking about Israel and Palestine, because the more they talk about that, the more extreme it looks. And in contrast then, or in comparison to what's going on in Ireland, Ireland looks like a lovely place. It looks lovely and peaceful. There's no bombs going off yet. There's fools blowing themselves up with pipe bombs, all right? But Ireland looks lovely and safe, and look at the great job we're doing now. We're in power, and Ireland doesn't look like Palestine. I don't know what Palestine looks like. Really. I have no idea. I have no first-hand experience of that. Neither do they. Micheál Martin's over there with his little jacket and that, right? Look at the carnage that's happening on the streets in Ireland. He won't even talk about that, right? So these clowns are projecting their own unconscious actions, right? The fallout from their own actions onto a country that's thousands of miles away. And they're guilty of the very things they're accusing this nation of doing. Whether that nation is involved in that or not, irrelevant to me for this case, right? So that's it. And these are not games, right? These have long-standing, corrupting, corrosive effects on the Irish people, because we will take a long time to rinse out the pro-Islamic, pro-minority, underdog, siding with the oppressed, right? We have a long, that's generational work to try and rinse that out of the Irish psyche to the point where we can begin to look like an optimistic people and a hopeful people, and one that is oriented towards the future, right? Towards an imaginative future, a future of possibilities, a future where we don't have to worry about stupid things that we should not be worried about, right? But that's not where we are at the moment. We're willingly sticking ourselves in between a conflict that's happening thousands and thousands of miles away, while ignoring the fact that the very same things are happening in this country. And people will allow themselves to be distracted by that. We are the Middle East now.